All right.
Wait, John, I think you're all set.
All right. I'm set. Are we ready? 12:01. All right. Welcome everyone to our Dune panel. My name is Jay Austin Yoshino. I'll be moderating this panel. We have an esteemed panel, and this is sponsored by Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative in conjunction with Fresh Pulp Magazine. Welcome everyone. And I want to start off by introducing our, as I said, our esteemed panelists. Let me move over to the prepared text. I'm sorry, I have no chill when it comes to these. Let's see. Let's see. What did I do with it? Oh, okay. So joining us today, we have Hannah Flint. She's a London-based critic, broadcaster, and author of British Tunisian heritage. Her debut book, Strong Female Character: What Movies Teach Us, was released in 2022, and she has covering film and culture for nearly a decade for places including GQ, Empire, The Guardian, Time Out, and BBC Culture, The New Arab, and many more. She is a co-founder of Cinema for Gaza and the First Film Club event series and podcast. She is also the co-host of the weekly film review podcast Fade to Black and a member of London's Critics Circle. Welcome, Hannah.
Thank you. And I guess the panel's over now because that was such a long bio I sent over. I'm so sorry.
No, it's totally fine. Also, I'd like to welcome Swara Saleh. Did I get that right? I hope so.
Saleh.
Saleh. Okay, so you did that. Okay. He's a Kurdish American and Washington D.C. based entertainment writer and podcaster who has written for The New Arab, Nerdist, IO9, and Polygon. The Nerds of Color and But Why Though? He co-hosts the Middle Geeks podcast, which covers all things in Southwest Asian and North African representation. Welcome, Swara.
Thank you so much.
And last but not least, Marguerite Hill, who is the executive director of Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative. She is a historian and an expert in anti-racism. She is also the co-host of Dark Matters podcast, a podcast that critiques film and media in the context of intersectionality and people of color, marginalized voices. So did I get everything? Am I missing anything? I'm sorry if I am.
You did really great. I'm so excited. I feel like I'm in a space with three of the smartest people who like this could not, imagine a better conversation, a debrief. It's been on my mind for so long. And y'all go. I mean,
Yeah.
I just want to just really uplift. It's really like a beautiful this beautiful solidarity. Like, I mean, I'm gonna have to take a screenshot of our space, but like just, solidarity with Palestine. I mean, it's heavy on our mind.
Free
And
Palestine.
yes.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to start off by saying, well, first of all, I actually want to say the words "Free Palestine, River to Sea." Like I think we're all down with that. So, and I also wanted to start off by getting everybody's top level sort of comments about the film. I want to dive right in. Let's just start off. Initial impressions, and we'll work from there. Who wants to start? Hannah, we'll give it to you.
Pointing Swara, but like we're in different sections of the screen, so you're like, who are you pointed to?
Right.
It's funny. I'll go. Although I have to say, and maybe this kind of explains a little bit of my feelings about this film, but I have blocked it out since seeing it like a few months ago. I guess my thing is with this franchise is being kind of in awe of the technical achievement, while also being just like disappointed with just how much it kind of erases, obscures the kind of the underlying influence of it, whether it's Islamic, Arab, North Africa, Middle Eastern. I also find that, you know, for me, why I loved Dune, the book, is that it was kind of one of those, you know, someone who's kind of seeking answers in my identity, looking for things that speak to who I am, where I come from, as someone who's half Tunisian. You know, I was like, felt like this was for us, in a way. And so when you kind of come to the film, and certainly in two parts, when you're like, this didn't need to be two parts. Pacing was a big issue for me in this film franchise. Yeah, it's just kind of bittersweet when you kind of see so many opportunities that have been missed in order to tell a more authentic, culturally rich story, one that actually speaks to the influences and I guess isn't as culturally appropriating as it really is.
Swada, you're a guest, so give us your thoughts.
Thank you. So I hadn't read the book like Hannah or some of my other friends have, and as I'm going to rewind a bit, going back to the first Dune because it's been an experience for me, eye-opening in many ways. When the first Dune was coming out, when they were doing casting announcements, many critics, Hannah included, were noting where are the Arab actors, where are the Swana, i.e. Mina actors in this franchise that's so taken from our cultures. And I just did some, you know, in lieu of like reading a book or seeing a movie that I haven't seen. I'm just so busy. There's so many things. I'll go on Wikipedia and I just looked into what Frank Herbert wrote, and just looking at the words and realizing how much Arabic, how much Farsi, how many Islamic terms were in this franchise, I was shocked, like kind of to my core. That I mean, I really shouldn't be shocked, to be quite honest, because this has been going on with Orientalist media and appropriation of our cultures for so long. But still, I was just like so shocked that it could be so blatant. So watching the first Dune movie, I was, to put it bluntly, very pissed. It was very Orientalist. I hate that wailing sound that Hans Zimmer included in his soundtrack, and it just yeah, you know, we had Hannah on our podcast review of it. Y'all should go back and check that out. It's actually our most popular episode on our podcast, The Middle Geeks. And it just like, it was so cathartic with her and Rocky to talk about it. And just like, this is for that to be an epicenter of like the Orientalism and the appropriation. Now going into Dune 2, I had a lot of critics for the first Dune movie for like Hannah mentioned, the pacing and the constant setup. It was just like very I have a lot of problems with that movie. The second one, I will admit, I actually enjoyed better because things actually happened. And I will actually give Villeneuve a tiny morsel of credit, not that much, but actually having some North African actors, at least in the background, plus Suhaila Yacoub's character playing Shishlaki, I think her name was, who is unfortunately still a very underserved character. They all are. At least I think that means he heard some of the feedback and he tried to be a little more inclusive, but obviously not at the forefront, which is the main issue, is that you have Javier Bardem, this white Spanish man in brown face, mispronouncing and butchering Arabic words and playing, in my opinion, I'm jumping ahead a bit, but a facsimile of a devout Muslim that's meant to be laughed at. Watching that during the movie was so uncomfortable, and I just thought, again, it wasn't as necessarily as bad as the first one, but still watching it, I just thought so many missed opportunities here. But not to mention like the Amazi garb that you had on Lady Jessica and some of the other Fremen, and just like, I guess it's like ultimately I came away with the second movie more disappointed than I was necessarily angry, because again, things actually happened. I could give this maybe like a 6 or 7 out of 10 if I were ranking it. It just like, I just had to dock it off still for the appropriation Orientalism. And I like, but seeing the second movie, I understand why people are so invested in it. And there is a leaving of intrigue for what the future may be. It's just that, yeah, the appropriation Orientalism, as we'll get into, it just sits very wrongly. So yeah.
All right. Well, that is we will come back and dig deeper into that. I want to hear more of your thoughts. I'm looking forward to it. Marguerite, please tell us your impressions.
Yeah, so I mean, for most people that know me know that I've been a fan of the book series since I've been 11. Um, and um, and it definitely was mixed feelings, right? I mean, I left the theater um like from as a book fan. One, it's like, like as a book fan, you're always looking for like how does this capture the spirit of the book? What changed in the characters? What did that mean? There was also the kind of like mixed feelings around the casting, and how did they play like the Stilgar character, which there is this kind of heartbreak that happens with Stilgar, but it doesn't happen like, where he's just a religious fanatic. It's just in the end, there's a lessening of the man when he believes the hype in the book. So there was like some of the changes that um did did leave me feeling so mixed. Like it was definitely a fruition of something that I had longed for. I had wished for like decades, right? Like a really good adaptation. But I was still had those same similar mixed feelings around it because of the Orientalism. And I don't mean that in a like in a broad term, but like actually very specific around how they were characterizing religion or and resistance in the film. So it's depiction of like fundamentalists and the naivete of the fundamentalists Fremen, which I felt was like very problematic. Not all of this comes from the source material, but it's like what was selected at this time. Like, so I felt like this was definitely um, a story that was filtered, like Frank Herbert, who had a lot more nuance in the source material, that was lessened. So that was kind of like I was like, okay, so I'm still kind of uncomfortable. Like I don't know what he's going to do with Dune Messiah. So I mean, is this going to continue? Is this going to amp up? Is there going to be that, are they going to listen? And I also did not understand the clothing that Jessica wore and some of the mothers were in the desert. I was like, that was some heavy, heavy material for the hot Arrakis, and they weren't in still suits. So I had some problems with that with that. So
Thank you, Marguerite, for that. Okay, and you bring up a really good point. And I kind of want to dovetail into that a little bit, which is as much as you're able to speak to, does anyone feel like, yeah, I think there's all a consensus about the Orientalist nature of the work. Does anyone feel like there was like Islamo baiting, for lack of a better word, going on, because of, for example, some of the changes in the tech in the terminology and the use and overuse of it. I actually want to start with Swadar on this because he also kind of touched upon this.
Yeah, I think Islamobating is a great way to describe it. I think it's just taking the, um, you know, from the specific cultures, whether it's Amazigh or others, that hijab specifically, you see across the franchise, that being appropriate. You see in, for example, Anya Taylor-Joy's fashion at the premiere, and like Muslim women and hijabis, especially like Marjorie could speak on that far better than I could, but it's that appropriating of the aesthetic when the people themselves are demonized and shunned for wearing it. You have anti-hijab, anti-niqab laws in France. And I was just like sort of thinking about it because like, you know, obviously whatever a Muslim woman wears is her own choice. You saw like the protests in Iran, the Xinjiang Azadi protests, sparked because of the killing of a Kurdish woman, Gina Amini, for apparently wearing her hijab inappropriately. And it just got me to thinking that whether it's women being oppressed for uh, being forced to wear the hijab or not wear the hijab, have it banned in Western countries, it's just like it's a very charged topic, obviously. and Western media is making it a fad for these white women. And I think that speaks to how they view like Muslim and brown Swanasa women, and how it's like they're their Orientalist playthings. This is how it's functioned. Orientalism has functioned across Western media for centuries. Um, but yeah, like I think going back to Stilgar, I think what really got me was with his praying, like him doing again a facsimile of a Muslim salah and praying to a god. And I'm like, okay, who is this god? What is their actual religion? What are the actual details here? Is this Islam? Is this something else? The book obviously goes into far more details. And by the way, I had no idea while I was watching this movie that apparently their religion is from the Bene Gesserit. And that's something that's dived into in the books. And so I feel like there was a lot of details lost that would have been like interesting, that could have
Really
elaborated more on
interesting.
what's actually going on here. Yeah, yeah.
Just
And
because I
more
think if
interesting.
you haven't
Yeah,
read the
go
book,
ahead.
so I was going to say, because if you
Yeah, go
haven't
for it.
read the book, I guess me and Margie are like, oh, we know. When you go in and you've read
I
the book, you know that context. So in a way, we don't have to look for it. I do think there's a little bit of it in the first one, but not enough, really. And I guess that's the filling in the gaps. So interesting. Sorry, I just like thought to myself, I was like thinking back to
no,
watching the film, I
please,
was
yeah.
like, did they make it explicit? Just a little bit more though. Yeah.
Well, let me ask Marguerite this question because this sort of follows that on, and I think she's probably she and I have actually discussed this a little bit. So because the portrayal of, as Swato pointed out, of Stilgar praying, we know that there is Zen Sunni mysticism, and then there's the Orange Catholic Bible. Can you talk?
I'm sorry,
about?
could we just pause for a second? The fact that
Yeah,
it's called, I knew this, it's called Zen Sunni should
right.
say everything. Sorry, to go ahead.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It said
yeah.
because he was a Buddhist. He was a Buddhist, Frank Herbert. And then I think it's like the third. It's like based on it's the Sense Wanderers, the Sunni Islam and Buddhism is brought together, and it's like the third prophet is the one that the
Right.
Fremens end up following.
Yes. So,
Yeah.
and anyone can weigh in on this, but I wanted to ask Marguerite starting off, which was, can you add a little bit more context in terms of how those elements were scrubbed out of the movies and how they might have impacted the general public's perception of religiosity in the movie?
Yeah, because well, the Orange Catholic Bible is sort of like where they just made all the religions come together all at once. So throughout the whole empire, Islam has elements in there, and so even the Bene Gesserit. So like I think it was like when in part one in the original, like where there was like the Gom Jabbar scene where the Reverend Mother was testing whether he was human or not with the needle. She says kul wahad, like so it's just like, which is like this, the Arabic phrase, which is like, say he's one. But and the empire itself, like the Sardaukar, all of that, there's just like a lot of elements of Islam throughout the whole empire. But Denis Villeneuve decided to make only the Fremen Muslim. The Sardaukar, like actually the empire is a Padishah emperor, which is Ottoman. And even like the look of the emperor would had red hair, which we know like a lot of some of the Ottoman sultans had red hair because they came from Eastern Europe, like so it's like this, the way that they kind of made it that way, when I think in some ways Frank Herbert was he was inspired by Lawrence of Arabia, which was really about, like Lawrence of Arabia was getting the Bedouin tribes to rise up against the Ottomans. And so, like I mean, it's like that getting scrubbed out of that, it makes Islam seem as if it's like not as sophisticated, or Muslims aren't sophisticated, that they're only like kind of like about asymmetric warfare, and when there's these like very complex dynamics, and that it makes the like power in the empire just white. And that is like the kind of like the determinism of white supremacy. So that's why I was just saying, like, wow, 20,000 years in the future, we still have a white supremacy problem. Like, this is like, like, I mean, this was just speaks to the imagination, right? So I was a little bit, so I think that was always like the disappointing part. It was like the minimalism in all of the decor, especially with the empire, which, like if we could see like some of the Ottoman palaces, which were like very rich and they were very sophisticated, but it didn't mean that it wasn't, there was like corruption or empire is empire, right? Like in but that to kind of simplify it and just make them like, Europeans who are just colonizing these brown people is, you know, that like that that would have been a really interesting opportunity to show the richness of a future that we could have, but still saying that there's always this risk that like the Sardaukar, because like the emperor came from the Sardaukar, which they were also like there's this environmental determinism, like how you're in your planet and your environment and, makes you tough. And so, but then there's decadence that can make you not so tough, which that's Ibn Khaldun, right? So you have all these influences that would have existed that we would have recognized, but then all we could kind of see is just like that the Fremen stand for oppressed people who are prone to fanaticism, and that is so Orientalist and possibly Islamophobic. It speaks to like Denis Villeneuve's fear of, it's like fear of
Yeah.
a Black planet, fear of a Muslim planet, fear of an Arab planet, like it's just, like, oh, they'll be unleashed on the universe and there'll be chaos. And so that's like
Yeah,
big concern for me, that narrative.
for
I
sure.
want to.
Sorry, I just want to add in, like, we have to remember that Villeneuve also specifically took out the word jihad. Like, he keeps referring to it as a holy war, but that could be part of his own ingrained Islamophobia regarding this whole topic. So just want to add that.
So I want to see if Hannah has anything perceptually, did you feel like they were sort of baiting Islamo baiting, that they were kind of flattening it to?
Yeah. I mean, I think this in classic kind of, if we look just at the broader kind of canon on sci-fi and the aesthetics and how we constantly see, I guess, like conflict played out, one of the things that's very clear to me is how much the aesthetic of the Sardaukar, the emperor, was very much like medieval England. We have the German aesthetic for the Harkonnens. It is very coded European white Protestant Christianity versus the Muslims, right? It's like Kingdom of Heaven, you know what I mean? It's that sort of situation going on. We've seen that aesthetic play out in Rebel Moon recently, part 1. Part 2 is going to come out. We've seen that even in Star Wars when we look at the kind of the Emperor and look at the way they're dressed, look at what the Jedi are wearing, their clothes. It's all this very thing, this Orientalist thing of versus the Occidental versus the Orient, right? That's the kind of what we're seeing, and this just perpetuates these very old kind of tropey sci-fi stuff that's come. We've seen millions of times before. It's shamed about Frank Herbert is that obviously everything stuck, not everything, but a lot of the sci-fi franchises we started with Herbert. So that for me is frustrating because it's lazy. It's lazy. It's saying, I don't need to do the work of explaining nuances of religion and how these dynamics are playing out. You're just going to see that the Sardaukar have got like 3 red stripes on the thing and a white armor, which kind of looks like the line, the 3 lines of the England when they were kind of, Richard Lionheart. You see the Fremen who obviously are wearing kafirs. We see the hijabs, the Amazighen are like kind of headdresses. And obviously she wears that headdress because that sort of kind of coins around the head is very much for the eldest, the most respected. She's the Reverend Mother. What I feel like it frustrates me about the kind of representation of the Fremen is the kind of binary of the Fremen people. You either have the ones who are like Chani, who are somewhat secular, but they are devoted to their people, or you have the Stilgar classified ones who are like Mahadi Lisan Ali, but they're like, I love this guy, literally, you're my guy doing I'm not Muslim, but I can recognize Islam, I recognize it. It's easy identifiable. So it is lazy. This is the appropriation, because what you're not seeing is the kind of, as much as these is the Bene Gesserit have created these religions, there's beauty in it. There's beauty in the shared, you mentioned Ibn Khaldun, who was the minute I started reading Dune and kind of wanted to learn a little bit more about the influences, I came towards the macadamia, and he was this like 14th century Tunisian philosopher who inspired everyone. And this book talks, it's like reading like the prequel to Dune in a way, because it's all about Islamic civilization. You mentioned the Ottomans for the Padishah Empire. Of course, this is about how you could cast the entirety of Dune and just have Middle Eastern, North African, South Asian characters, and it would still work. And I tell you, there is enough great actors out there who could definitely fill the role. But you're talking about the sedentary life, which is civilization, versus and kind of cities and cosmopolitan lifestyle. Baron Harkonnen is a perfect example of excess and how what the kind of corruption of having too much. Whereas obviously the Fremen, in their kind of this sense of group feeling, this kind of connection to each other, that is shared faith, it's shared understanding of the ecological factor survival, makes them strong and able to survive. And it's kind of, that is in a way championed. And I did say macadamia. I said macadamia. Apologies. I'm a bit tired. I've been working all day. Macadamia. Did I say macadamia? Did I say macadamia like a nut?
I think you're fine.
Okay. All right.
I
if I
it.
did, apologies. So yes, I find that what we're seeing here is, we don't, Reverend Mother Lady Jessica, she gets every single memory of every single Reverend Mum that's been before. That includes every single Reverend Mother of the Fremen. Do we have an insight into what that is? No. Everything is kept at a distance. So it is a superficial Islam. It's saying you recognize these things. They've also pulled things from like these kind of points with the Fremen. They've pulled the more kind of, I guess, the more fundamentalist aspects of that kind of, they grow. We don't, as much as 2.5-hour film, we barely spend any time with the Fremen at all. Therefore, we don't really see that kind of, that sort of kind of evolution of that kind of journey where they become a little bit more fanatical around Paul, and also just Paul. I mean, one thing I love about this entire franchise, this entire like fantasy series, is it's an anti-Messiah complex. It's saying Messiahs are bad. And, we get a little bit in this. And I kind of do think they do a little bit better in kind of understanding somewhat that journey. That he's a reluctant Messiah. He doesn't want to be this person, and yet he embraces it. What we don't really get is like the why it's such a big, I guess, like the risk of, you mentioned the jihad and the fact that they change it, holy war and all that type of stuff, even though the kind of origins of that word is far more kind of philosophical. It's kind of like a struggle. You have the internal struggle that they're going through of finding themselves, but then also this bigger struggle for determination against oppression. Like, this is a jihad, yes, but not in the modern sense of it, not in the Western interpretation of it, not in a kind of kind of Islamophobic interpretation of the word. This is about trying to find freedom. And actually what we've learned, there is, without kind of resistance, revolution, independence, it cannot be achieved without violence. We've seen historically that has not been managed at all. So yes, sorry, I've been talking for a very long time, but I hope that kind of answered how much. So all of this to say, yes, it's Islamophobic, it's Islamabating.
And just to like go off on that, and this is something Imad Aisha mentioned in the chat, it's postmodern laziness. And absolutely, it's lazy. It's copy pasting what we've seen play out in real history again and again, with Western colonizers versus people in the MENA region versus Muslims. And it's not original. It's just, well, obviously you should be inspired by real life. It just seems, this is why I keep mentioning Orientalist playthings. That's what we, across us brown and black Muslims, are to white audiences, to often white Orientalist creators, taking this aesthetic and telling stories that aren't theirs to tell. As great as Dune is, and as much potential as there is in there, I think I personally see Frank Herbert as having done that. But still, when y'all read Dune, the novel, you saw the representation in there. You saw like where you could identify, and Frank Herbert still did his work, which makes this franchise even more disappointing because of how much potential there was in there to have like Muslim Swana creators in there. And just tell something, do a little bit of a new spin on it, like have actual MENA actors, Muslim actors playing the Fremen and go deeper into their religion. I'm left frustrated by this facsimile of Islam that's presented. I want to know more. I'm genuinely interested, but the film doesn't give enough to work with. And it's just so much lost potential, as well as being Islamophobic, as we've discussed.
I
Your
agree. I
thoughts on
mean,
that, Margaret? Yeah.
yeah,
Good.
I mean, there's some scenes in the book. So one of the things I was really stoked, and I'm sorry, I'm like kind of in the shadows with this light kind of coming in. But one of the scenes in the book that I was like, wow, I mean, well, there's a couple of things that were in the book that I think would have really deepened some of the connection or given a sense of like the depth of the Fremen experience and moved beyond the kind of fundamentalist versus secular folks, because in many ways like the Fremen like religion in Dune is still very secular. Like it's a very secular book. It's a sci-fi book. There's a little bit of like even understanding this sort of magic, like the prescience. Like, so this is like the issue, right? Of like, how can Paul see the future? He has these visions. So there's something in him that already can kind of have that prescience, like seeing things, but then the spice really activates it. The way that the spice allows the space navigators. So there's like this economics that goes into it. But within the Dune, I mean, within the Fremen religion, there is this notion that they have when they talk about the Tao of the Fremen. And so there's this kind of collective experience that they have with the spice orgy. So there's like this, like they all get, like when they kill, so we saw like the baby worm when they drown it in the bile, and then when the Reverend Mother who has gone through that process, like she transmutates this poison into a substance, and that they all partake in this, and it's like this shared collective experience, and it's like compared to the Empire, which is very dangerous for everybody. There's no need for like poison snoopers, there's no need for things, but in that scene, like in there's an like in that you have this collective of understanding the Fremen collective and why they're so loyal to each other. Then another scene that I thought could have been utilized was there was a scene where Jessica, who now has all the memories of all the Reverend Mothers before her, and they're called like the Fremen actually developed wild Reverend Mothers separate from the Bene Gesserit. So they developed their own system of collective memory, because since they've been on Earth, with the third, it was like their third prophet, that they have been oppressed as a group and moved from planet to planet. And so that they have this system of keeping their memory through the Reverend Mothers. And every day, like part of their timekeeping is remembering their enslavement on Bella Tegus. And so Bella Tegus is like this planet, it reads like Andalusia. And then so it was Ramadan in April on Bella Tegus. I'm probably like butchering it a little bit, but that's like, so for me, I was so happy to do this panel in April. I was like, is Ramadan in April? Because when are we going to get another April for Ramadan? I think it's not going to happen next year. Like we won't, like we'll have to wait about 30 years before, or 20 years before it becomes like April and Ramadan again. But in that kind of collective memory that would go back, and that in many ways would have just added some richness and and grounding the Fremen religion in the experience of like 20,000 years of being oppressed. And part of their oppression was like that they did not recognize the authority of any government. Like these were people that really truly saw themselves as like only the creator, only God as being legitimate, and these worldly governments as being illegitimate. But removing those, and instead of like showing like Paul being bad, like the way that they showed Paul being bad is like that he's a bad boyfriend. It's just like, so that's the way that everybody.
Please, can I spend 20 minutes talking about this
Yes,
young
please.
adaptation of Dune?
Yes, please do. And Hannah, you like, this is where I felt like the story arc of like of because you
Chat,
have
yeah.
like your books. I want to talk like your book, which you have such great insight on characters and tropes. And so yeah, if you could take it away.
Well, I just think I mean, obviously my book's called Strong Female Character, and the point of it is to kind of like deconstruct what it means to be it. And for me, like Chani, it's so interesting. There's a lot of conversation about her, about how she's just kind of a follower to Paul, and certainly she has, as if she's got no sort of agency. But I think again, if you learn more about the Fremen and their choices, the women, what they make, the fact that she's in the Fedaykin, she is one of the strongest warriors out there. What they miss in the film is there isn't just them teaching Paul their ways, how to sandwalk, blah, 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 or how to write, the worm, sandworm, but they've also, Paul and Jessica are teaching them how to fight. There is an exchange of information, of knowledge, of things to survival skills. So it kind of, in a way, for me, that was a real kind of deepening of their bond and why they love each other. Of course, there's also the element that they've totally cut out about Chani being pregnant, having a baby, child gets murdered. I mean, and I can understand. It's a lot. It's a weird book. It's a very weird book, and that's why I love it. But there's this thing at the end. It really wound me up in the sense of the fact that she runs away. And I think that's just a petulant, childish act. That's not for me. They did that as a strong female character act. Like, oh God, look at her. She's so in touch with herself, and she's not going to allow Paul to carry on. And she's the only one who questions him. And yes, there needs to be a sense of, I guess she's trying to be like the audience way in. But her leaving then, compared to the book, where literally her and Jessica have the last conversations in the text, which is another important thing. Like, women get the final word in this book. I think for me, that was just it was just one of these another ways of, let's set up this love triangle with Irulan and come back for the next film. And it really, for me, just reduced her as just a sort of prop to push, again, simply just to put Paul's narrative forward. And I mean, Margie, come on in on here, because I feel like you have so much to say and I want you to come in.
I agree. I mean, obviously there was like, there was that ambivalence, right? Like where Chani was like, okay, like, and like, because I mean, one, it's like the Fremen still were polygamous, and then yet, like, but there was also like women's autonomy in some ways. So there was like some contradictions around that, because like Paul, like also like in the book, it was like when Paul kills Jamis, like he inherits his widow. And he has 2 stepsons, and they're like, yeah, like, so there's a lot of weird stuff. And like, I feel like this audience, like, instead of like really pushing forward like that, there's all this kind of dynamics, right? Like how Paul gets integrated into Fremen society, and how Jessica is like this kind of like, she inherits all the memories and stuff. But what I was thinking about, like, for me, is like looking at the like the 3 tropes, and I gotta feel it's like it's the maiden, mother, crone. And so like all of like in the book that because it is a weird, like most hero stories outside of Beowulf doesn't have a son and daughter. I mean, like a son and mother thing happening. But in Dune, it's like he's out there surviving. His mother is key to his survival. Women are key in his development, as he's responding to. And the only one that he doesn't have more of an oppositional one is with Chani. But I do think that in some ways there's like more nuance in Chani than in the book, that kind of made me a little bit like, I was like, wait, Frank Herbert didn't really get into her interior world, which I would have really, really loved, because in the book, Chani was actually next up. Like when she was the one that did the right for Jessica in the book. But then, like in this one, she's pure warrior, but she's not initiated into this realm of like womanhood that's in Dune, like this mystery that only like Paul, like the chosen one, the only thing that makes him chosen is that the Kwisatz Haderach is supposed to be able to do a thing that only women could do, which is to take the water of life. But So I'm just kind of thinking about like those kind of like the influences of women, but then what happens when your sole purpose is to be the growth of somebody's character. And but what I did feel like in the novel, like with I'm gonna butcher. I'm so bad with her name because it's like but it was like every
Shaklee, I think.
Shaklee, every woman of color was sacrificed
Mm,
through both movies, right? Like you have
mm.
Liet Kynes, um, you have Shaklee, you have even Shout Out Mapes, and then even like
Because they're gender
Chani.
swap. Do you think it's because I mean, they're gender swap roles just to give some more women in there, right?
Yeah, but I mean it's
It's
still
annoying still.
I mean, and there's gonna be spoil. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
Chani is on the slate, like so it's just like who gets to survive all of this? Like
Mm.
what is this kind of story arc? And that really makes me uncomfy. But I mean it's the source material, but I mean it's gonna be like even though Frank Herbert did the work, it's still through the lens of Frank Herbert,
Mm.
who's a white man writing about
A
like kind of
Republican as well.
I thought he was libertarian. I mean, apples and
You
oranges.
know,
I mean,
like
apples and oranges, but
one of the
like,
racist ones. Well, they're
yeah,
all racist to some degree.
yeah.
So
So, well,
So,
since you're on this, Marguerite,
Mhm.
let me ask this question for initially both you and Hannah. Um, but it seems also that Rebecca Ferguson's character, well, um, Paul's mom, Lady Jessica, sorry, it feels like through both movies she was coded as kind of, if you were to make an equivalent in, in real life, it's coded as kind of a white liberal, a white liberal feminist woman who comes and decides that the natives can't save themselves, so uses the missionary protectiva to inject a bunch of lies into. In other words, it feels like the that Lady Jessica sort of subverted the agency of the Fremen, but in particular, the women seem to be the most adversely impacted by what she did. So I'm
Ooh.
throwing that out there as just more meat for you guys to sort of,
mm.
you know,
It's
pick apart.
definitely like she's a kind of a plant. I mean, what I kind of see is like as a I mean, this is sort of the like I mean, we know that there's people that like within Muslim communities, there's people that are put in our communities and they're provocateurs. I'm totally butchering it. But like they're kind of plants, like they're in there, or maybe there's a particular gain that they have, right? That they have for being in community. And some of them may start to believe in what they believe, but yet they have this kind of role. And sometimes when people come into a community, as opposed to just being of service and being regular Muslims, they're like, no, I must lead the Muslims to and do new things. So one of the things I was kind of thinking about was I mean, and I really hope the story gets into adaptation, but is Muhammad Asad, right? Who wrote Road to Mecca, which is like really great book, but it's like, like is thinking about like what is the kind of role that he played in the creation of modern, like kind of like modern nation states of like in the Middle East, but also Pakistan. And so it's just like, I mean, and his son, Talal Assad, brilliant scholar and everything. So everybody read Road to Mecca. Let's try to get that film adapted.
Mhm.
But I do think like Dune is that kind of like it kind of speaks to maybe like they start to believe their own hype, right? Like through that, like the prophecy was created, but then you have to do these things to keep the prophecy going. Um, yeah, but I am also kind of thinking about the role, like because initially she was like the one really pushing for her son to stay, like to like go towards the Landsrod and like leave the Fremen. And then in the end it's like like they're just really using the Fremen to their ends, and that's heartbreaking. um and I just I think that in some ways, like for them to not really look at how maybe the Fremen were using them. Like, look, we want to get off this thing, and we know now we got somebody that has an end to the empire. We got the Duke's son. We got the new Duke on our side. Like, they didn't frame it that way, of the kind of ways that when you read Dune Messiah, there is this one scene, and I'm sorry, spoilers, but there's one scene of a Fremen who's like, yeah, I just went on jihad. Like, he's like, I didn't believe this. It's like, I went on jihad because I wanted to see a planet full of water. Like, that was it. He's like, I wanted to immerse myself in the water. And then when he did it, he was like, it didn't mean anything. What was I doing? So there was a lot of Fremen that did not believe, but they just saw it as an opportunity. But in this, it was like they all rose up. He's like, send them all to paradise. And it's like, a lot of them weren't thinking about they're going to paradise. They were like, yeah, we're able to kind of strike back. We have our person on the inside. But of course, some filmmaking could be lazy. It could, especially when they're talking about the agency of brown people, they're just going to super simplify our motivations.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on that?
Well, I was going to add that, I mean, what I kind of, Rebecca's role in this really reiterates there aren't no heroes or villains. There's no heroes in Dune, really. There's mainly villains. I mean, she is maintaining a social order. She wants power. She is part of this. I think it's really interesting how I feel like Dune is trying to basically critique both science and religion, in a sense, on how we blindly follow either or we use it to our own kind of advantage or gains. What you were saying just there about people just following the course is a very human thing, just latching onto things, just using kind of, I guess, group belief or kind of an idea, a kind of a movement in order to kind of get personal things or to see what they want rather than actually true belief or having faith, right? I feel like Monkey Man is a quite good example of like how that's kind of the corruption of that, if you haven't seen that recently. But I guess I think with the Bene Gesserit, they're kind of like, have this messianism through science. And then we see that, as we've seen with the kind of like the navigators, how spice is used throughout the universe, science is an advantage, and people like literally bowing down at the altar of science, stealing from, the spice for the rest of the world. Whoever controls the spice controls the universe, right? And that's a form of kind of cult following. Then you obviously have the Fremen, who kind of represents a more simpler, the religious aspect of it. So I think they're kind of, he's trying to like say I think ultimately it's like the way that people use religion and science to do shitty things. And I think that's what I think for me, the biggest message. So when it's someone like Jessica, what I kind of love about her characterization, as you were saying about this kind of white feminist, she's like, she ain't good people. She's like, I don't just want to I'm calculated this. I want my son to be the most powerful, because it's kind of the, behind every great man is a great woman, that classic kind of idea. And she wanted that. I think it's really interesting how, the characters in this is, this is a 60s, right? It's quite a very old kind of, it's got quite archaic ideas about men and women that have kind of like perpetuated, kind of carries on. So I get the idea of the need for, in some ways, to try and modernize, certainly through Chani and stuff. It's like, let's try and make her less kind of like a sap who's just following her around. But I guess what I appreciate in some ways is for me, the strength for Chani in the book, just on that, is like the way she's able to stand there. Not, she doesn't cry. The whole thing is like, you cry is like a big no-no. So for her to do that, that's weak. That's like that's the stoicism of Chani was really lost in it. Whereas Rebecca, what I kind of love is this kind of from going from I'm in control of this to, oh no, I'm not in control. Oh no, he's flipped. He's gone full Vader. Like, it's happening. Even love the emo, like the black kind of like cape they came out in with the black coal eyeshadow under it. So yes, I guess I am so sorry to go back to your thing. I just thought it's really interesting, the kind of like conflict at play here in so many different ways, where I really don't think its intention is ever to demonize religion, or kind of demonize science, but understand the fact, like the kind of the flaws within each kind of structure when they're used for power.
All of this is so fascinating and just speaks to me like of the real depth that's in this story, this ongoing story that Frank Herbert wrote. And my concern is, and I come at this as a non-book reader, especially after viewing conversations online about it, and some of Denis Villeneuve's own quotes, I feel like a lot of this went over the heads of audiences, which I think is very damaging overall to Herbert's original work, but just to the understanding of these various topics we're discussing. Online, after the movie came out, people online were being like, I want to go wage a holy war, like not understanding these intricacies and subtleties of the storytelling. And people who had read the book were like, "Oh, wait till you read Dune Messiah." And I discussed this in our like review of Dune Part Two. I'm I hope that it will stick to what actually happens in that book in Dune Messiah. There is the concern that studio executives and Denis Villeneuve might try to water some things down. I don't know. I hope that he understands his own story that he's telling based on Frank Herbert's novels. But then Denis Villeneuve says things like, I believe Dune is about the triumph of the human spirit. What? I'm so confused here. And this is, as I, not so much the books, but as I dive more into like this film franchise, I'm more like confused by it. I'm more like, what exactly are they trying to tell? Obviously, it should be what Hannah and Marjorie were just discussing. Again, based on the text and based on their own understanding of the film, informed by the text. It's just, it's a confounding adaptation of the book in that regard. And I think like the film, it does some really amazing visual things. And like in terms of this, something I said in like our review of the film is that I think that in a sea of like all these blockbusters, many of which look the same, Denis Villeneuve does something relatively unique. I mean, like for example, the black and white planet looked amazing. I think some of the action scenes were really good. Just the cinematography was really wonderful to look at. But on the depth of the storytelling itself, I'm just like, what are we doing here?
Interesting. Okay, so we are coming up on an hour. I want to give everybody an opportunity to give their closing thoughts on the film, one and two, or just two, the book, everything. You want to start us off, Hannah?
Well, thank you for having me on this panel. First, it's been a really interesting talk to everyone. Unfortunately, my opinion of the film is still the same. No minds have been changed. I guess for me, I guess there's two aspects of them. This is exactly the sort of film I expect to be made by Hollywood that still uses geopolitics to demonize an entire group, entire religion. And as what we've seen today going on, that's still very prevalent and around now. So the fact that this film came out while we were in the 6 months of a genocide against Palestinians, this doesn't surprise me. It disappoints me. It disappoints me because it's one of these things where it just seems to be these snail's pace where representation for quite a few other kind of different groups, it seems to be getting better really quickly. Whereas when it comes to people who are either followers of Islam, or if they are Southwest Asian, North African, we're in the back of the queue. So for me, that this is just a franchise that perpetuates that and makes me feel quite disappointed and sad that the industry that love the films that I love just don't love us back. I guess just on a like a critical film, just if I take the kind of like that kind of culture conversation out, for me, I just want to for filmmakers to like tell a good story in one film. I'm all for Avengers, Infinity War, Endgame. I love it. Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, Return of Jedi. That's great continuations. Dune Part 2. How is it you have nearly 6 hours of time and still don't manage to tell a story that feels satisfying, that feels complete? I feel like I did not get the return on my investment as much as I enjoyed some of the action set pieces, some of the characters. Jason Momoa, Duncan Idaho, you will always be famous. But yeah, I mean, I wanted more.
Okay, thank you. Swata, if you could, you want to be next?
Sure. So I'll just say I echo many of Hannah's own thoughts. I think she put it very succinctly for the both of us. But my other closing thought is on the perpetuation of Orientalism in mass media. Star Wars is a franchise that's basically based on Dune and took inspiration from Dune and also appropriating Swana Arabic words. This is something I learned from Hannah that the term Jedi comes from an Arabic dialect where al-Jedi means master of the mystical warrior way.
Wow,
Like,
I did not know that. Mind
yeah,
blown.
yeah, it's very maddening how, George Lucas took um Frank Herbert's cue of again just taking these words, taking these aesthetics, whether it's the robes, whether it's the on Tatooine, like the hijab-esque like clothing and as well as from East Asia and South Asia and just repurpose them. I mean, the entire Star Wars franchise would not exist without the entirety of Asia and North Africa. So I hope that what audiences take away from this conversation is to be more critically forthwith about how they view their media, like who should actually be in here, what are the cultures actually represented or not represented in terms of casting, in terms of writing, in terms of directing, and realize that it may not seem like it, especially against the backdrop of something as horrific and utterly devastating as a genocide against Arabs and Palestinians. But it does relate all of this, the erasure, the Orientalism, the appropriation, it does percolate and it does give implicit um I will say like acceptance of this is something that just happens to brown people. This is something that just happens to black people. We're just on the cusp of the 30-year anniversary of the Rwanda genocide. And yeah, I'm hopeful for like upcoming generations to that are more cognizant of that. You look at Gen Z, very vocal for Palestine. I just think in terms of a lot of these nerd spaces, a lot of these film going spaces, there's still a long way to go. And we have to show up and call this out whenever and wherever we can. So that's my closing note.
Thank you. Marguerite?
Oh, I keep it brief. Thank you so much. You both brought so much insight. We're just gonna have to take those as like really great clips to just repeat over and over and over again, like as a mantra, to understand this films and the purpose that it serves. But I do think it's like this is why it's so important for folks from our communities to write our own stories. Because there's always like when people are writing stories about us, it's for their aims, right? It's important that we are decision makers in that, because even if we served as consultants, because I was like trying to look and I'm still going to do some more background and research. So beyond being consultants to provide, clues and that, whether it's in the soundtrack, like with the music, like which could be better, right? Within the clothing, within the use of language, within the practices, it's important that folks from the Swana community, from Muslims are decision makers, informing and part of the creative process, so that the harm, not just we move beyond harm reduction, but telling stories so that we can transcend, like we can connect our shared stories, right, and our shared humanity, as opposed to otherizing communities. And so I think that's really important, and why we always support content creators, creatives, folks doing this work, and critics, so that we can, when we're looking at it, we can critically engage. So I'm really proud of all of you all for doing that and manifesting that in this work. And I look forward to following all of you. So where can we follow you all? I mean, I know that's your role, but I want to make sure that our audience follows you both, and reads
And so
your writing. Mhm.
I'm so sorry, Margaret. I actually just want to add one other thing. What you mentioned about our own stories being told. I just want to pitch for the audience as two amazing stories from like Western Swana peoples. First off, the graphic novel Squire by Nadia Shamas and Sara Al-Faji. It is incredible. You actually want to look at what a colonization story from our perspective looks like. That's it. And also Assassin's Creed Mirage. It's incredible. Best like representation of Baghdad ever. And sorry, I just wanted to mention those.
Great. And also as Marguerite asked, where can we follow you all? Where can we find you so we can keep abreast of your work?
Oh, you can. I'm at Hannah Flint, know it Julian on Twitter, or at Hannah and S Flint on Instagram. And if you would like to follow and keep up with Cinema for Gaza, we have an auction that is going on until midnight on August 12th. We have some insane prizes. I think we've got 180 lots from various people from the film and television world. Some of the amazing Arab creators we have is Jan Zamanj is going to do a filmmaker Zoom. Sherry Dabis, the first Arab woman and Palestinian filmmaker to be nominated for an Emmy. She's denoted some from Only Murders in the Building. There are so many people. We got some white allies. Susan Sarandon. It's amazing. So you can follow them at Cinema for Gaza.
Excellent. Thank you. And Deswado, where can we find your work? Where can we follow you?
Y'all can follow me on social media at Spider Swars. I am the co-host of the Middle Geeks podcast, which covers all things in Swana media. We just actually we're at AwesomeCon, so check out our panel that we had there. And yeah, I write for several sites as a freelancer, but why though Nerds of Color? I've written for IO9, Polygon. I just had my debut at Nerdist with a review of Monkey Man. So please check that out.
Congrats.
And the film itself. Thank you so much.
Right. Marguerite?
You can follow me on Twitter. It will forever be Twitter. Slowly growing on Instagram, but definitely follow my sci-fi work with Fresh Pulp. We have some really good stuff coming up. So definitely
Hidden Black Roots of Dune on Fresh Pulp magazine.
And there's
Great.
more. And I also have Medium. I'm cataloging all of the the works. So we have some links here, but like if you have any reviews or writings about Dune, I'm cataloging those and sharing those out so that folks can find them.
Excellent. Thank you again.
Can I
Thank you.
Can I add one thing?
Please.
Sorry.
Please.
I feel like I should mention it. I'm re-releasing my book in a smaller paper form with a new chapter, strong female character in August, and it's going to be a chapter on like Palestinian solidarity and cinematic activism, looking back to the last kind of 6 months of what's going on.
Excellent. I can't wait to have a look at that. Thank you everyone for participating. I want to remind everyone that this event was sponsored by Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative. Please go and check out our website. Please go and check out our links. Contribute if you can, and support us in our programming. And we hope to see you in our next some of our next events and our panels in the near future. So thank you everyone for showing up, and enjoy the eclipse. Bye everyone.